There's a whole basket of undesirable feelings that we organize under the title of mental health. I think it's more accurate to just call this misery. Whether we're talking about anxiety or depression or any of these forms of negative preoccupation or um, emotive suffering, I think we tend to try to get this too complicated. And in doing so, we're looking at a problem that is addressable in a very unaddressable way. So one technique is to sort of zoom up and out from the overly specific view and try to see the causes of this as a pie chart. And if you were to look at the slices, maybe you can isolate some main causes that overlap whatever kind of variations you have in symptoms, experience, situation, whatever. And it turns out that if you do this, a few things emerge quite clearly. And in this video, I want to talk about just one of those, which is something called open loops. Now, I didn't come up with that term. You can read about it elsewhere, but I have thought an awful lot about this, and hopefully what I have to say is new to you in some way, for one reason or the other. So I think the best example of an open loop is when you go out to eat and the waiter or waitress comes over to your table for the first time. So in that waiter's mind, they have opened a loop. There is a new continuous task at hand. And that loop will be closed when they give you the check. Actually, when you leave and they pick up the check, right? But when you vacate and you've paid, it's a done deal. Until then, you have some portion of their attention. They are going to be thinking about you consciously and even subconsciously. You still got a tag on the peg of their mind, right? So their resources are being diverted to you. And attention's a zero-sum game, and so that attention is going to be split between whatever active tables they have, as well as everything else going on in their mind and body from the rest of their life, or even in the context of the restaurant. And so this is a nice example to think about in terms of open loops. We've all experienced this. So my question for you is, at a given time, how many open loops do you have in your life? And what kind of management do you have over them? What do I mean by that? Well, are you even aware of them? It turns out that you can have varying levels of control over this. Now, for those of you who are or have been programmers, you know all about this from the context of something we call multi-threading. So on your computer or your phone at any time, all the applications you have running, and there are a lot of them, they all have some right to the resources of the system. And whatever the device is, it has rules to manage these things. But sometimes, from time to time, those resources can be misallocated and everything gets unresponsive and weird. From time to time, the system can actually lose oversight on these threads, these open loops, so to speak, and come to the point where it can no longer control those things. We call those a memory leak in the technical jargon. But you're very familiar with these because the only thing you can do is turn the thing off and turn it back on, right? Once it gets loose and there's no more control on it, that's the solution. So is your life like this in some way? It almost certainly is. The good news is it's not that way because life is this uncontrollable mess and we're all just sort of caught up in it. It's like that because in modern times, as a society, we've lost very well-known tools to deal with these sorts of things. We've generationally we've essentially cut our legs off. We've handicapped ourselves in this very required capability, right? And so that's why anxiety and depression are through the roof. Looking at the pie chart and just sort of looking at the biggest reasons. So now I want to help you see just how often you create open loops in your life. one of the reasons that we're kind of blind to these open loops is because there's just such an abundance of things that can grab our attention in the modern world. And we use these things. We pull out our phones, and every waking minute, if we have 3 seconds of free time, people are looking at their phones. And they also install things on their phones to actively take their attention. Something's going to buzz or ring or something, right? Or you're going to go check something on your phone, and there are 50 other applications that could have some kind of alert. It's going to divert your attention. And that's only a partial telling of the many forms of technology that are competing for attention today, and all of which are delivering some kind of dopamine hit or other mental impact of catching our attention. There are also tons of drugs that are available for very little money today, and a lot of them are legal and widely used for that purpose. Even our lifestyles, we live extremely busy lives compared to almost all of human history. Anyone who's familiar with some sort of farming environment, if they've worked in that or they have homesteaded or even just have a little garden, you know that life is designed to ebb and flow. There are seasons, and things are really busy in the spring, summer, and fall, and then things relax over the winter. And that sort of thing is even historically, you could trace this over a week, right? So Sundays for a very long time have been a day of doing something different than your day-to-day work for a very long time. And we've lost these things as a modern society. Even the day, so people work, I have to be careful with this because I could broad brush this too much, but the mental exertion of the modern world is extreme compared to historic norms on a daily basis. This ebb and flow is gone. Okay, so today we're in an environment where we need these tools more than ever, and yet we're less familiar with them than ever before. And this is one of the reasons I wrote this book, Joy on Purpose, which I highly recommend you read. It's got all sorts of techniques for dealing with these sorts of things. So, closing loops is very important. And one of the reasons that people don't do it is because it gets overwhelming very quickly. You are highly likely to have trained yourself on ignoring open loops. And so when you start to pay attention to open loops, you're going to be very quickly overwhelmed because you're living in this fantasy like there are far fewer things going on than actually are, and that they matter a lot less than they actually do. It turns out that almost all people in the modern world are constantly distracting themselves from reality. And once you start to take those blinders off, it's overwhelming. But there are tools and techniques for managing this, and they're very important. And so I refer you to Joy on Purpose to read more about those. And just to remove the mysticism from it, there are techniques of managing the things that you need to worry about in a way that frees your active attention from them. You can keep track of these things and prioritize them in a way where you remove all the stress and all the mystery, and it puts you in full control. And it's really not that hard. So that's the good news. But I want to talk specifically about one sub-idea of open loops, which is just how often you're opening them and leaving them open and then throwing them to the four winds in ways that you can never retrace, and what effect that has on your mental health, because it causes massive amounts of anxiety and depression. So, in brief, let me just rush through that, okay, just to give you a taste of this. Let's say that you feel particularly strongly about something. Boy, that never happens in the modern world, huh? People don't have strong opinions. Yeah, so we have strong opinions about all sorts of things. Why? Because we live in a world that's flooded with information, and people have lost the ability, for the most part, to discern between information and knowledge, because they're not the same. And they think that just because they're informed, that their position is well supported or intelligent at all. And very frequently it's not. So anyway, you're awash with these strong opinions on things. So let's say that you decide to share one in a public setting, maybe on social media, doesn't matter, via email, doesn't matter. Now, what you're going to get, because the system is designed this way, the system is designed to send your public emissions to folks who already agree with you. But let's say that through some fluke, it gets to someone who doesn't agree with you. And they just so happen to not just be informed, but knowledgeable on the subject. And so they reply and they contest your position. And they just so happen to have some really strong evidence and it's articulated well. What do? Well, 9 times out of 10, what you're going to do is you're going to have an emotional reaction. And you're not going to feel good about what they said. Maybe you'll get angry. Maybe you'll feel a little bit guilty. Maybe you'll start experiencing some sort of self-doubt. And then you're going to respond. The funny thing is that how you respond will be very consistent. You're going to respond by saying something that's emotive in nature. Not rational, emotive. Because when you live your life in the open loop way, you're not a rational person. Your motive is to feel good right now, not to be good long term. Those are two irreconcilable motives. So you're going to seek to feel good right now. And the best way you can get there, it's not by arguing your point. It's not by open-mindedly listening to challenges to it. It's going to be to dismiss that other perspective as fast as you can. And so the easiest way to do that is to say something like how disgusted you are at someone else's perspective, or who hurt you, or I'm so disappointed that you feel that way. And we could go on and on. Maybe these things ring a bell. You've probably seen them often out in cyberspace, right? These are not adequate arguments. These are emotive evasions of actual rational discourse. And to the point of this video, they're open loops. They're open loops pretending to be closures of loops. You're not actually addressing anything that was just brought up to you. And so you're perpetuating an open loop in a way where you think it's closed. You put that thing away and it's still going. It's like having some kind of nuclear reactive material, and you think that by putting it in a box at the base of your bed, you're making the problem go away. It's still cooking. It's still affecting you, even if you're not paying attention to it, even if you're not aware of it, right? So let's say somebody slips into your crawl space and puts nuclear waste in there. It's going to affect you, even if you don't know where it's coming from. Now, this starts to make sense why all these people who quote unquote struggle with anxiety and depression, and I put that in air quotes, not to minimize the problem, but so often how we talk about something, how we address a problem, impedes our ability to solve it. And if you act like it's like the rain, or, something about the weather or some other thing that's just random and who knows where it comes from, you'll never get to the bottom of it. I'm telling you, a large percentage of anxiety and depression comes from open loops. It comes from people being dishonest in their response to challenges to their worldview. Now, I talked about this with a specific example of someone coming at you on social media for something you said. But this can come from anywhere. It can come from just the world. The natural world can contend against your worldview. If you're Sisyphus pushing that rock up a mountain and it keeps rolling down, that's counter evidence. It suggests that you're being stupid in some way and that there's a better way to accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to do, because what you're doing is ineffective. And so if you respond to that in any way other than trying to find a better solution, or listening to the people that are challenging your perspective, or coming up with better counter arguments, and if you can't, submitting to their point of view. If you don't do that, if your idea of resolving a problem is ghosting someone because they say things that you don't like, you're creating open loops. And odds are that you suffer from anxiety and depression. Imagine that. So I invite you to think about these things, because I'm willing to bet that the problems that you're facing in life, that you just throw up your hands and you say, oh, the world's so hard, I just don't even know what to do. It's probably from spinning off so many of these open loops. You probably do it nearly every day, and you're woefully unaware of it. Just for the sake of completion, this isn't just about what you believe and what you say in public. It's also very much about what you do. Let's say that you live in a permanently disorganized place, a house, apartment, it doesn't matter. It's a total wreck. It's a mess. But you're so used to it that it doesn't bother you anymore. This is another important feature of open loops. Just because you're not consciously bothered by something, it doesn't mean it doesn't subconsciously bother you. You know, a lot of peer-reviewed studies have been done on design, the science of design, like office spaces and things. And even certain colors on the wall will affect your ability to work. The temperature of the room affects your ability to work. And your mood, it strongly affects these things. So why wouldn't a messed up room affect these things? Why wouldn't a chaotic environment where people are always fighting with each other, or the TV's on all the time and it's blaring? These things affect you. But if you're not aware of the incoming effect, it's still going to ooze out subconsciously. How? In the form of anxiety and depression and all of these other negative feelings. What we choose matters. It has an effect, and it continues to have an effect even if we're woefully unaware of that effect. And so it behooves us to increase our awareness of these things, to look around and say, you know, how can I be a better person? How can I do things better than I do? How can I make better choices than I do? And again, I refer you to the book Joy on Purpose, which you can get for free as a PDF download on upwardthought.org to get ideas about this. Because again, if you go into this full bore, you're going to get overwhelmed. But there are actionable tactics that you can apply to make sure that never happens. It's just a prioritized list. And it's a beautiful thing. So I wish you well. I hope you take that seriously. It's a really big deal. And if you go down the path where you start applying these things, you're going to see more and more in the lives of people you care about that the things that they struggle with are completely addressable. The problems they struggle with are completely solvable. Now, there are always bigger problems. But the ones that people, again, coming back to the pie chart, the ones people really struggle with the most, they're completely solvable. So I encourage you to find and apply those solutions because they're out there.